You're
Absolutely.
checking on
And
YouTube, I
I
guess,
just
if
want
we're
to,
live.
yeah, uh, I really like the shirt you're wearing. So just to confirm, YouTube is up and we are about to have a very good discussion today, Nicholas. We are on question 5 of the ACE test that we're going to cover. I just want to, may I just get to the question and share it with the viewers?
Sure. Maybe let's remind the viewers that they can access the test by scanning the QR code that will be on the top left-hand side of the screen. We also have another
Absolutely.
QR code. There are two QR codes here. One off if you want to support this live, and then this other one where you can actually scan the QR code, go to the website, and just answer for yourself. There is no commercial interest involved in this test, and it's just really for you to acknowledge yourself. Um, so, question number 5, Rene. We
Yes.
have covered some overall. We have looked at the first question about divorce, then we looked at another 3 questions which had to do with some form of violence, right? Verbal violence, physical violence, and then sexual violence. Um, we could probably dig a little deeper in the sexual violence one, but for now we're just going to move on. We'll come back to all these topics eventually. I think you had a good question that you asked me just before the live, and that maybe I would like you to ask again for the viewers.
Yeah, absolutely. For the question that we're going to cover, may I just read it out together, maybe together with the viewers? Yeah, the question reads, often or very often, I felt that A, no one in my family loved me or thought I was important or special. Or B, my family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other, or support each other. So the question I had, Nicholas, is this sounds like neglect or denial of something, which is also, as I got to understand from you also before we came online, is a very new discovery in this field of trauma study and research. So, since it's a very new discovery that this is not what something happened to you, but something that did not happen to you, could we classify it and categorize it as a classical or non-classical form of trauma from this discovery?
Yeah, I like the question because it comes back to the pie chart that we had, and um, that sort of highlighted some of the most typical things that we think of when we think about trauma. This whole program is about trauma. It's about educating the public what trauma is, and as well exploring different stories around trauma. And I used at the beginning, I used the word classical and non-classical. Here, I have changed these words to typical or atypical, because these words are synonyms. And if you Google trauma and classical and non-classical, or trauma and typical and atypical, you will find some other things related to this, but it's not an agreed on standard word as much as developmental trauma is, or shock trauma is, or simple and complex trauma is. These are words that are used frequently, and they are used all the way from the top professionals down to the lower tiers of professionals, or even the public, actually. So classical and non-classical, typical and atypical, were only put there to express the concept that certain stories of trauma are now much more recognizable by the public. If I meet somebody, if I meet you and I say, I have a friend that was in the war between Ukraine and Russia last year, and they have trauma now, there is an immediate acceptance in you about the story that I just told you, right? Trauma, war, of course, right? But if I told you, I have a friend who, when he was a child, was together with a very nice family. His father was an ambassador, and they moved around a lot. Every 3 to 5 years, they moved to another country, and the father was very ambitious. So they went to all sorts of exotic and sort of out there kind of countries that are not very renowned. And every time he went to a new country, it was a completely new language, completely different new school system. And so he was always spectrum of being discriminated against, just because of his skin color. Um, Wherever he stood, he was discriminated against at some right at school, and so he experienced a lot of discrimination and a lot of change in the school systems and so on. And today, this person displays the same symptoms of post-traumatic stress that the person that went to Ukraine does. If I said that to you, you'd have probably a harder time understanding what I'm talking about. Is that correct,
Absolutely.
Rene?
Absolutely, yes. I would find it a bit hard to wrap my head around it.
Right. So, okay, discrimination is an active act, but discrimination is also something that we do by not giving access to something, right? So let's think back again, a classical example of discrimination in the USA during the apartheid, or even South Africa for that matter. You cannot go into certain toilets, right? There are toilets for blacks and there are toilets for whites. Or you get on a bus, you cannot sit down if you're a black person, right? So we are not punishing the person that is coming on the bus. We are not insulting the person that is coming on the bus. We are not pushing them violently. We are not obviously sexually abusing them, uh, but we are neglecting them the provision of a comfort, right?
Mm,
They cannot sit down or relieve their urine or their feces at an appropriate time, right? And
mm,
of course, sitting down, it's a real big deal, right? For anyone
yeah,
who has lived childhood, sitting
yeah,
down is something very much needed at times. And the same, going to the toilet is one of the very, very basic needs, like engaging in sexual activities, like eating, drinking, and breathing, right?
yeah,
It's that important. So if I'm not allowing you to go to the toilet at a time when you really need to go to the toilet, that is what would you call that? Like, we will go into the technicalities later, but you, coming from a naive point of view, how would you describe that? How would you call it?
yeah. That is almost a denial of my own humanity, the denial of my own needs, and not even seeing that the needs worth addressing. Yeah,
Exactly. So it's a denial of your humanity. Indeed, I like that. Well, that's exactly what question number 5 today touches on. And question number 5, yes, probably falls in the atypical stories of trauma. To the extent that we haven't had enough time to educate the public about the fact that not doing certain things to our children causes as much post-traumatic stress in adulthood, and all the risks for depression and anxiety and chronic
mm,
pain, uh, mental illnesses in general, that we have seen with the more classic trauma to war, right? Um,
yeah,
so it's taken very seriously in my field, very, very seriously, but the public hasn't caught up with that. And it's a
yeah,
little hard, and how denying the humanity to somebody, or denying certain basic needs in the life of a child, leads to post-traumatic stress. So today, that's what we're tackling. And that's why I thought your question was important. The reason why we haven't really been able to educate the public yet as much as we have been able to educate in other things, is that when the foundational doctor that whose name now I cannot remember, my apologies, but when he began to observe that in his clients, people who could not lose weight, because that was the sort of the foundational research that this doctor was investigating, the doctor that created would experience test, the very test that we are looking at today, of 10 questions come. We are question number 5. There are 10 questions. It's called ACE test. Okay, you can find this online. And the doctor that created this list of questions was studying patients who were obese, and he was trying to make them lose weight. And he was noticing that certain clients were losing weight. Notice just no matter what he tried, were not losing weight. So the more he observed that they were not losing weight, the more he took an interest in actually in them and started to ask them more and more questions a bit outside the sphere of peculiar interest or work. And then all these stories come up, right? So now we create the word, sort of the word and the concept of trauma. We create literature. We start to inform the public. As we inform the public, more cases of the fore, right? The same thing happens with sexual abuse, right? The more the more people are empowered to talk. So
mm,
now the stories that are coming to people like me, therapists who are trauma specialists and trauma informed, um, are stories that do not fit the classical view of why these people should suffer post-traumatic stress, right? They were not hit, they were not sexually abused, they were not insulted, they did not experience a divorce, but they tell us, my narcissistic mother only talked to me when I served her purposes, when I corresponded, when what she was getting from me corresponded the image of what she had of me, but not really, right? So there is a sense that something hasn't happened, and that is very important to that individual. When I say this to you, it's it's still hard to capture what I'm saying, right?
yeah. And go ahead.
To be able to start to understand this, we need to go back to what a child is and what a child is born with. A child is born with a certain set of needs, and those needs are a need for feeding, a need for being covered and sheltered, a need for contact, body contact, and a need for attention. Yeah, a baby does not cannot do anything, cannot provide themselves anything, right? So if a parent starts to not feed the baby at an appropriate schedule, or at a time when the baby seems to desire food, and we're not talking about seconds or minutes here, we are talking about,
Mm,
leaving the cry for hours when it is clear that the baby might be hungry. Okay, so I am not feeding this baby now who is crying for food. The neurons in the brain of the baby are still in the process of trimming themselves down. We are actually born with many, many, many more neurons that we end up having in adulthood. And the baby is born with an instinct that says, if you cry, then somebody will give you food.
mm,
And if that instinct is not nurtured, then that program that is in his brain will begin to fade away. If you do not feed a baby that is crying, hours later, one day later, at some point, the baby will stop crying. even though the baby
Mm-hmm.
will unlearn the behavior of crying,
Mm-hmm.
just not being that behavior not being confirmed. Right? Eventually, that baby will die if he's not fed, and that death will not come with the last cry. That death will come in silence. Okay, so a baby is born with a program. That program says, if I cry, I get food. And that program also says, if I cry in a slightly different way, I get mommy's body contact or body
Mm-hmm.
touch. And another little cry says, I'm uncomfortable because I just pooed or peed in my, um, underwear or nappies. I'm very uncomfortable. I'm itching. I need to be cleaned. So to be fed, to have body contact, to be cleaned are very basic needs. And if we, as parents, as nurturers, care of this baby, do not answer to these very basic needs, we are neglecting these basic needs. We are denying the basic humanity of this child, right? And this child will learn something. So we have gone to the extreme of saying, well, if you don't feed this baby, die if we for hours, he will start to begin to learn not to cry anymore. If we don't feed this baby for an hour, that is enough for the baby to start to become anxious and worried, right? So this baby is learning something about the world, and it is learning that in order to be able to get food, it needs to cry its life out. Almost, we are far from death
Mm-hmm.
yet, but just imagine a baby crying his lungs out, like crying as much as it can. So it's just before it will learn not to cry anymore in a very bad way, right? So it's basically driving the baby to exhaustion before the baby can get food. If this happens constantly to this baby, then this baby has learned that to be able to survive at a very basic level, it needs to become exhausted. It needs to expand all
Mm-hmm.
its energy out. So we can extend this sort of logic to every other basic need of this child. And then as the child grows, to also the other needs that will come into the picture, such as the need for being spoken to, for being given encouragements and attention, for being given reassurance and safety, and so on, right? So the more we grow, the more our needs expand, the more our brains become complex and rich. And so denial and neglect can be applied in the same way throughout the development of these needs. Does that make sense to you, Rene?
It actually does make sense because uh, just from the how you set it up, whereby you said that when in the programming of the infant, when they are trying to use this strategy of crying and it doesn't work, they can unlearn it, and say, okay, if from a subconscious level they realize this is not working and something else has to happen. So until I find out that's something else, I have to put this to the side, and which means silence, like you said. When the child ends up maybe neglected to a point they may take their last breath, it won't be in crying, it will be in silence. And that's a very powerful anecdote that they will have given up. They were like, that did not work, and I don't know what else is working. So until I have this last moment to figure it out before it's too late. If it's too late, it will have already found me already absconded and rejected that a prior idea. And even right now, where you're explaining that how it happens, whereby they feel that it takes extra effort to get their needs met, not just a cry of one whimper or one shuffle or one shout or whatever. in an extended amount whereby they feel the exhaustion that someone come, and address this need, whether I've soiled myself, I need some warmth, I need some feeding. It could apply in the rest of their lives, whereby they feel that they need to do something extra, whether it comes to trying to overcompensate themselves, trying to overspeak for themselves, trying to be over assertive, understanding this is the only way someone will even try and figure out, okay, it seems that you want something addressed. Finally, what is it when you're already exhausted yourself?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's how it goes. And so, of course, for example, the need to be acknowledged not just in your physical presence, but also your psychological presence. So, when we say, uh, the person that is denied the right to sit down or to go to the toilet, they are denied a physical need.
Mm,
Um, but the psychological need of feeling appreciated by others, for example, just important. And can neglect the humanity, the psychological humanity of the person, and cause just as much damage to that person as you neglect a physical need. And that's
mm,
because mind are really intertwined. But
mm,
the analogy physical example that I gave before still stands in the sense that if you deny the need for reassurance or appreciation in a growing child all the way to adulthood, the adult as well will show many signs of stress, many signs of hyperactivation. But if you ask them, they will not be able to speak about why that.
mm,
Just like the child that doesn't get the food and is exhausted and sort of, you know, split off its mechanism of expression, so the psychological being ends up in that place. So neglect not only is sort of hard to see in the moment because it's just not something being done, but it's also hard to speak out. There is an added layer of complexity. How do I express that which I never got, but that
mm,
very foundational level I was instinctively born to experience? For example, Gabor Mate speaks of the inborn need to experience autonomy and safety, connection, autonomy and
mm,
connection. When the baby gets angry, for example, or the child, a small child gets angry, and if the parents disconnect from this child and completely ignore him getting angry or her getting angry, then the child learns, in order for me to be remain connected to my parents, I need to stop being angry.
mm,
Every time I get angry, this foundational need that one of the most foundational psychological needs that we have is to be connected to others, particularly the nurturing parents. And if every time I get angry, I get completely disconnected from my nurturing parents, then I stop getting angry. And so the voice of anger, like literally the voice, the apparatus, the physical sensations of being angry become dampened.
mm.
The voice of anger. Right? So that's why neglect is difficult to to to, to educate other people about, and why it's still an atypical sort of narrative in the trauma psychology. Although, as I said, for us as therapists, it's absolutely up there in terms of its importance. Yeah,
Absolutely. Thank you so
we
much
will
for
definitely
the
have to talk a little more
absolute.
with some examples of neglect. Uh, this is a very important one. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Nicholas. In fact, I'm looking forward to sharing an anecdote I have, or be in the next episode, so that to better bring this to light, to understand it, and really get to understand how this ties together from the childhood. So thank you for all of those who have tuned in for this particular episode. We have gone a bit over time, but it was a very good discussion. Thank you, Nicholas, for joining me for this particular session. Also, I would like to suggest and encourage everyone to buy us a coffee in case you are feel prompted to support the work and the discussion and the materials we bring forward to you. Also, we also always encourage everyone to subscribe so that you get the alert when we are about to come online every week. And also just take the ACE test and follow with us on this question number 5 that we have just started. So thank you, Nicholas, and looking forward to the next one in the next week.
Yeah, thank you very much. Bye bye, everyone.
Bye bye, everyone.